And you're here to talk about Africa.
Yeah. So,
Sweet. Okay.
Yeah. So it should be a fun talk.
It's always
You kind of mentioned like the spectrum of talks we have today. So we have LiDAR and QGIS, and I'm going to be really on the cultural geography side. So bear with me. I'm going first because I woke up and I'm actually losing my voice. I think it's allergies because mine tend to come around the summer. So I don't think I'm contagious at this point. But a little bit about my background. I got my PhD in geography from UT Knoxville right here in our program. And I've actually been fortunate to work at Oak Ridge National Laboratory in their GIST program for essentially the entire time I got my PhD. So I worked part-time during the school year, full-time in the summer. And this is research that I actually did this past summer. And so I had 2 months to do it. My mentor was Dr. Amy Rose, if you know who that is. And she said, okay, so you have 2 months left here. I want you to come up with an original population geography project that advances what we're doing already within GIST. And this is what that is. So the title, you can see it's a classic cultural geographer's title, and it's just a mouthful, but I stand by my identity. So fusing geopolitics, human development, environmental policy data to predict population stability through open source. And this is actually a case study in Africa. So again, I graduated just in May 2018. So to kind of house where this presentation comes from is that Oak Ridge National Laboratory on a really large scale is a very quantitative environment. So we're talking the STEM field, and I'm a cultural geographer. So how did I get involved with Oak Ridge? Well, my boss, about 3.5 years ago, Amy Rose, interviewed me and she said, okay, so you're a cultural geographer and you do know GIS. We're really interested in seeing what you could do to bring in more of a human cultural perspective to the really quantitative work that we're doing. And I've been there ever since. So this was that final project, and it was really bridging my talent and my background in cultural geography with things that they're already doing. So I decided for the summer, because I was going to do something to advance what is happening with LandScan. So LandScan is a global population distribution data set, and right now the resolution is at 30 arc seconds. So you can Google this, and you can see what the availability is and kind of what the purpose is. They have a long-term goal. It's a 5-year plan, and they're going to get that down to 3 arc seconds. So they're going to fine-tune that spatial resolution. So with that, it's a lot of logistical delegation. It's a lot of planning, saying who's going to do what. So this project essentially delegates that workflow. So that's why I developed this. So you'll see at the very end, basically all this led up to a map that shows here's areas where we might need to spend a little more time on data, because this is where it might be more volatile over the next 5 years in terms of stability. So that's all this was. This is essentially just a visual, let's do these countries first, but it's data driven. And again, cultural geographer working in a really quantitative environment, so I used a lot of literature to do this, and I do use Python very regularly. So it's an interesting mixture of both quantitative and qualitative methodologies. And that's just an example of what LandScan does look like. So they're hoping to fine-tune that. So it's ambient population, and it's refreshed every year. So the software that I used are things that you could download completely free from anywhere. It doesn't really matter what your job situation is. So I used PyCharm to conduct the Python analysis. I used QGIS. I used Zotero, which is it's a bibliographic management system. And again, this is really data driven. It's not only quantitative data, but I also have at least 200 different sources of literature going into this. So I needed a way to house that. And also Super Decisions, which is a software that allows you to make, and I'll explain it a little more, but it essentially allows you to make decisions in a really intense workflow like this, using a lot of different metrics. So why did I choose open source? I mean, I probably don't have to necessarily justify it to this crowd, but I did want replicability. So I wanted people to be able to replicate this regardless of where they're working, regardless of what their financial situation may be or where they're housed. And also that increases the accessibility. So people can not only say, oh, I could recreate this or do this my own project, but can also, it's accessible. It's software that you can download for free. And also, unemployment is very fun. So as I said, my contract ended August 1st, so I am job searching right now. But I knew on August 1st that my contract was ending. So I didn't want to be stuck after that using ArcGIS and then not have access to a license. So I said, well, this is my first time using QGIS. So I need to learn how to use this because I don't know where I'm going to be after this. I don't know if I'm going to be affiliated with a university. So that's why I chose open source. So to get into the research, what is population stability? How do I define it? And this is all with inspiration from literature in population geography. So essentially it's a deviation from population patterns as they currently exist. And that can include an increase in population. That could also include a decrease in population and also a change in age-sex distribution. So you can see here with the population pyramid, if you see any kind of change in these distributions, that's deviation. Now in a sanitized population model, okay, few populations in practice actually show this stability. So that's something that's important to take note of. So how do we measure population stability? I developed a 5-point scale. Again, this was a short-term 2-month project, so it is kind of coarse in that aspect. But I developed a 5-point scale to look at population stability. So the first one is stable. That means we're seeing little to no population fluctuation under current conditions if they continue. Relatively stable, that's the next step, low to medium change. Agitation, that means that there are certain things happening there, whether they're cultural or environmental or socioeconomic, that are causing some agitation and potentially fluctuation, but we're not necessarily seeing it yet, but the ingredients are there. Relatively unstable, again, we're just getting more and more intense, so medium fluctuation, and then volatile. So that would be significant, either increase, decrease, or change in age-sex distributions. So I combined 5 different metrics to study this. So the first one I have is Human Development Index, and that's from the United Nations Development Program. And it essentially studies how developed is a country in terms of what access to resources do humans in that country have. Now, the things that they use to test that are life expectancy, education index, so that's years of schooling, expected and mean, and then what is their standard of living like. And it's basically indexed into a score for every country across the world with some exceptions. So the categories that they offer are listed here, so very high down to low. In those categories, as you'll see later, is what went into my Python script. Then I have age structure, and that's using information from a couple of different international and national agencies. So we have young and youthful, or youthful, hourglass, working class, and aging. And it's all standardized on ages 15 and younger and 65 and older, and everything in between. So this here would be a young or, young or youthful population pyramid. So you can see most of them are in the younger ages here. So we're talking under 15. This is hourglass, so it looks like an hourglass. So you can see we have a lot of youthful population. We also have a very significant aging population, not much in between. This is working class. Most of the population is between that 15 and age 65. And then aging, obviously most of the population is 65 or older. I then use the Fragile States Index, and that's put out by the Fund for Peace, which is essentially just a think tank. And they look at a lot of different things. So this is where geopolitics, this is where my cultural geography comes into play. So we're looking at cohesion, economic, political, and social factors. And you can see some of the things here. They're looking at what do public services look like. Are there demographic pressures, governmentally, geopolitically, what's going on? So that is also an index. And then what's put out is categories of fragility. So again, just like HDI, there are certain categories. Some countries are within sustainable all the way to alert categories, and that also went into my script. Then I looked at levels of geopolitical unrest, which is subjective. So how you define geopolitical risk is subjective. So the way that I defined it was measuring it through the Corruption Perception Index. And this is also a think tank, international think tank. And they look at the levels of corruption in the public sector in the country. And I'll show you what those look like in a second. And then I looked at if there was a presence or absence of a terrorist attack in the past year. Terrorist attack defined through the University of Maryland's Global Terrorism Database. So in unrest, if it was low to moderate geopolitical unrest, that meant a corruption perception score of less than or equal to 47 and a terrorist attack. High would be a corruption or greater than 47. High is less than 46 and a terrorist attack in the past year. So I actually created these categories through a natural breaks analysis, so they were not put out through the think tank themselves, but this is what the data showed for the 2018 figures. And then finally, environmental performance index. This is where environmental quality and health comes into play. And this is from Yale, Center for Environmental Law and Policy. So it's the same thing as all the other metrics. They're bringing in a bunch of different data about air quality, water quality, biodiversity, fisheries, energy, things like that. So this is data fusion, really. And I also created these categories again, or derived them through a natural breaks analysis just in Python. And these are what I found. So poor all the way to good. These also went into my Python script. So then, once I had just all the data collected, I then used super decision software to make pairwise comparisons. So this is kind of what this looks like. You essentially make a model, and you say, all right, I want to look at stability. Here's my 5 different metrics. How important are these metrics in a stable population all the way to how important are they in a volatile population? So it's 5 different examples. And some of the thinking that goes into that is, in a stable population, having a high HDI is 10 times more important than a poor HDI. But then, in a volatile population, in that model, a poor HDI is 10 times more important than a high HDI. So basically going through every single classification, comparing every single data to each other. And what that gave me is just a way to sit down and really logically think about this. Okay, so when I make my model, what different combinations of these metrics factor into different kinds of stability? So with the AHP and with super decision software, you can really use it as in-depth as you want to. So you can use it as just a way to reference, to help yourself make decisions, which as a cultural geographer, that's about as deep as I go with it. You can also use it to do a lot more sophisticated quantitative analysis too. So it's freely available. I really suggest using it. So what did the model look like? Well, on the front end, I wrote it in a really user-friendly format. So you turn it on and it says, tell me the most recent HDI score, tell me the most recent CPI score. Was there a terrorist attack in the past year? What is the age structure? And then the actual coding in Python, every single combination of metric is actually split by age structure. So 4 categories: youthful, working class, hourglass, and aging. And then on a 1 to 5 scale, it's going to spit out what that is. So there's 216 classifications. And because I'm a cultural geographer, I was the token cultural geographer at GIST at Oak Ridge. This is what I was brought in for. I actually personally classified all of those combinations. So can you do that on a larger scale? Probably not with one person. But in this setting, this is the methodology that we went with. So using not only the literature that I referenced, and that's where Zotero came into play, using the population research experience I gained there, as well as those pairwise comparisons. And that's just an example in the back end of what that looks like. So I'm fairly new to Python. I guess I've been doing it for maybe like a year now. He was my Python teacher. And so this is what it looks like so far. There may be areas where the syntax could be better, but you can see here, so I've got HDI up at the top here. I've got what is the age structure look like. So this is what the script was. It was saying, depending on what data the user puts in, this is then how we're going to classify this country. And this is what that user side would look like. So it's going to tell you all of these stabilities in this first question, what is the country's most recent HDI score? And then you can see here 0.759. Okay, recording HDI is high because that is a high HDI score. And then it goes on to the next questions. And again, that was my first script for really what I call a real world problem, in the sense that this is something at Oak Ridge National Laboratory that was actually going into our workflow in delegation of land scan tools. So this is what it ended up looking like after I input all the countries. This is what we're expecting for population stability across Africa for the next 5 years. And the reason that it's 5 years is because that's...
You gotta be in the picture.
Oh, do I? Okay.
Yeah, we have to brag about our graduates.
So the next 5 years is because Landscan, it's their 5-year plan. So you can see here mostly through, I don't know if you can see the mouse here. Yeah, so what we were kind of expecting, sort of this Sahelian area just south of the Sahel, is where we're seeing a lot of instability. The island nations around Africa is where we see the most stability. And this is what we're now using in Landscan to essentially delegate our priorities, delegate our tasks. So countries like Nigeria, Cameroon, South Sudan, we're going to focus on those first before we focus on countries like Seychelles, for example. And this is a way that we can get the 5-year plan. We can accomplish that because that's a lot of work to do a global fine-tuning of that spatial resolution. And in areas like this, we really need to have as much quality data as possible, and we need to have it done soon because of these ingredients for volatility. And this is my first map in QGIS, and I really enjoyed making it. So the results, so I have the map, and I say, okay, and I meet with my mentor, and we say, all right, well, is this true though? When we look at news sources, when we look at literature, what's going on in these countries, does it make sense? And the answer is yes. For most of these countries, the results do make sense when you just cross-reference them with geopolitical data and news sites, you know, from the BBC, what's going on in these countries, and also communication coming from those African countries themselves. They do make sense. So the countries that are showing up as more stable are also pretty much internationally known as being more stable, at least contextually, in a sense, on the African continent. Countries that are more volatile, that's also being shown in geopolitical media. And so most of the instability, and again, this is, you can easily cross-reference this in news sources and governmental sources across that Sahelian region, so just south of Central Africa, where we see the African transition zone between more desert kind of environmental area to grassland, savanna, more forested, and Horn of Africa, which geopolitically is a big hub right now with oil production, oil reserves. Most stability is currently in the island nations and around Northern Africa. Northern Africa, if you look at a lot of geopolitical news sources, folks will say, yeah, it's still unstable in an international sense. But if we just bring down the context to Africa, there's a lot of stability there when compared to the rest of the continent. And the islands are also, they're widely known as being really stable, especially islands like Seychelles. Now with climate change, that's supposed to significantly change the stability. But within the next 5 years, this is kind of what we're looking at. After that, we're going to start to see the model is going to have to change a little bit to bring in some of these climate change factors. 50% of the countries in Africa have relative instability, so that was that number 4 ranking, so just below volatile. And that's something that I just find really interesting. You can, again, when you look at Africa in an international sense, at least in population geography and what we do in GIST at Oak Ridge, we're seeing a lot of instability. And across the country, we tend to think of it as being a very unstable country population-wise. But then when you zoom in a little bit, that's not quite the case. If you take out that international context and start to zoom into the continent itself. And it's important to notice, too, that the results, I categorized each of those 216 comparisons. So this wasn't a mathematical model, it wasn't machine learning. I did all of those. And because of the scale and the size of the project, I could do that. Now, could I do that in a bigger project? No. This project is simply to delegate internal priorities, delegate our workflow, because it does reflect my own bias on the literature that I've read and how I weight different metrics within age structures. That's okay. It doesn't invalidate it though. So that's something that's important that I really like to know, is that I stand by this research and I stand by all the decisions that I made. Would they be different if somebody else, if another population geographer undertook this project? Most likely. So my next steps, this is actually very soon going to be in review in a geography journal, so the manuscript is already written. And I'd like to expand the model. So you can see I only used 5 metrics, and it's a country level. It's the same model, or continent level, same model for every country, which I would like to remedy in future research. So if I had more time to do this, I would want to expand the model. If possible, do a country by country model. So depending on the country you're looking at, that's going to change the back-end coding a little bit. Obviously adding in more cultural and social metrics. So bringing in more geopolitical influences, bringing in, maybe there's religious pressures on population, maybe more social pressures. Really bringing those in, because I am a cultural geographer. Again, make that scale finer, try and do country by country level, and even if that was too fine for the time restrictions, go to region by region level. So have a different model for North Africa, different for South Africa, different for the Sahel. And what I think this could turn into eventually is actually a paper that looks at how cultural geographers can have merit in a more quantitative environment. I haven't seen a lot of that work yet, and it's kind of a battle that I've been fighting ever since I started at Oak Ridge 3.5 years ago, is that, no, I was hired for a reason, I belong here. Yes, I'm not doing the machine learning that people are doing, I'm not doing these extremely sophisticated geospatial techniques, but I do have a purpose here, and here's what I can do to help you accomplish your end goal. So I'd like to do a paper like that at some point. So that's everything. My voice is really starting to crack. So there's my email and my LinkedIn if you'd like to keep in touch. Again, it's in review right now, but I'm happy, or it will be, but I'm happy to send you the paper if you'd like to just look over it. And I can send you the entire script as well. That's no problem. Just email me. Any questions?
Where are you looking for jobs?
All over. So I'm mainly looking, not as a professor, but kind of alt academia. So I'm looking at a lot of libraries. I actually just interviewed for a position as a GIS librarian, which is really neat. I'm looking in industry as well, market research, pretty much all over, doing mainly mixed methods research, because I am a cultural geographer, and I mean, I'll be the first to tell you that being a sole cultural geographer is hard to get employed. And so bringing in the mixed methods is really important. So I'm essentially looking all over.
There's a lot of firms that, it's kind of hard to get onto the World Bank, but there's a lot of firms that do subcontract into the World Bank.
For sure, yeah. Thank you.
If you change your model so that it's unique for every country, then it's kind of hard to sort of combine all the results back into a single map, isn't it? Since there's sort of apples and oranges now.
Well, it depends on the context. And so if we were to do this, if this was going to be done at a finer scale, it would be in the same setting. So it would be in GIST at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. So in that kind of setting, that would be if we were looking at a specific country within Landscan and getting deeper, and then we want to get that sophistication. Now, in another setting, that would be problematic, for sure.
So is this going to, so the pie chart, is this running like a notebook type setup?
Yeah.
Then you're, okay. Notebooks are all the rage, not like this. Notebooks are my current doctor from 2 years ago.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a really, I really liked it. It was my first time using PyCharm. Before that, I mainly used Notepad++, so I liked it. I thought PyCharm was really great.